think it's fine now. Okay. Hi, everybody. It is Friday afternoon. Time to have your question and answer session with our Facebook Live session with Attorney Carl Shusterman. This is Tanya Friedman. I am the Chief Operating Officer of Kinetics, and we've been bringing you a almost weekly session of question and answers about immigration for nurses. And I think this is our fifth or fourth. I don't know. I've lost
maybe six.
Maybe six. I've lost count of how many we've done. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome. I'm going to give a brief introduction for those of you who have not joined us before, and then we'll get to the topic at hand today. The topic for today is adjustment of status green cards. And we're going to be speaking about the different, July, that's my birthday month. We're going to be talking about a number of different scenarios about when to file an adjustment of status green card and how that works. Hi, Lorraine. Thank you for joining us. So a little bit about myself and Kinetics. I've been in recruitment for many years. Kinetics is a recruitment company. We specialize in high carry. Welcome. We specialize in bringing international nurses to the US, both Canadian and other countries. And the reason why I separate that is they come on different visas. We have hospitals all over the US, both acute care hospitals, long-term care facilities, correctional rehab facilities in all 50 states. And we specialize in direct hire placements, which means that you are going to be working directly for the hospital. We work with many hospitals who are obviously their main focus is recruitment and retention of American nurses. But right now we have a nursing shortage. And the stats according to the American Nurse Association is we're going to need a million new nurses by the year 2022, which is a huge number. And that's why many hospitals and healthcare facilities are looking at international nurses as a way to supplement their American recruitment and a way to bring in more nurses to meet their needs and make sure that they can take care of the patients that they are going to be seeing to. So a formal introduction to Carl Shusterman. He's an extremely well-known immigration lawyer. Just a little bit about Carl. He has been practicing for 40 years of experience. He served as a trial attorney for U.S. Immigration and Naturalization Service from 1976 until 1982. He's one of the very limited numbers of attorneys who've been designated as certified specialists in immigration and naturalized law by the California State Bar. For more than 10 years, he's been voted as one of the best lawyers in America and as a super lawyer by his colleagues in the bar. Carl was featured in February 2018 issue of Super Lawyers magazine. Last week I posted a picture, Carl, of you with your Hall of Fame, all of your certificates and accolades for everybody to see.
Okay.
He's been named as one of the top 15 corporate immigration attorneys in the US by Human Resources Executive magazine. His hard work and dedication to immigration law has earned him the highest rating in legal abilities and ethics from the prestigious Martindale-Hubbell Legal Directory. He has served as a member of the Immigration and Nationality Law Advisory Commission for the State Bar. He's listed as the immigration who's who of corporate immigration lawyers. Carl has testified as an expert witness on temporary visas and green cards for registered nurses before the Senate Immigration Subcommittee in Washington, D.C. So there's probably no one in this country, or very few people in this country, let's be fair, that know as much about immigration law, and specifically here we're talking about nurses. So thank you for your time, Carl.
Thank you.
So today we're talking about adjustment of status cases. For those of you just joining us who are not yet sure what an adjustment of status green card is, I think, Carl, if you want to maybe just give us a quick synopsis of that, and then we can dig deeper into the topic.
Yeah. Actually, historically, and I wasn't practicing in 1952, and I'm going to tell you about it, but I was reading about this, and before the 1952 law, if you wanted to get a green card, which means to become a permanent resident of the United States, you had to go back to the U.S. Embassy in your country. You couldn't do it in the U.S.
Oh, wow.
So, and then in 1952, they created something called adjustment of status, where you could go from some temporary status to become a permanent resident without leaving the U.S.
Okay.
And through, my entire career, most of the people that we do get green cards through their jobs get it in the U.S. through adjustment of status. Although some nurses, we do get abroad. I've gone out to the U.S. Embassy in Manila and so on.
Okay.
But, with that exception, almost all of our employment cases, we get the adjustment of status and they get their green card here.
Okay.
And we'll talk about the procedure, we'll talk about the forms, we'll talk about things you get while you're on the way to adjustment of status, like work cards and international travel cards. Okay.
So on one of our previous calls, we spoke about the 245K and the 245I. If you want to give us like a brief synopsis on that again for those who are just joining us as well, who missed that initially, because I think once we've kind of gone through that, we can talk about the different scenarios of who, as a nurse working in the US, who might qualify for an adjustment of status or green card.
So if you're a nurse, traditionally the law has been every day that you've been in the US, you must be legal in the US and you must not be violating your status if you want to get the green card without going back to your country. Okay. But, during the last 20 years, they have passed some exceptions to that, and sometimes it's very important. Back in 1994, they passed 245I, and it said, if you were out of legal status, but somebody, and they updated this a few times, somebody applied for you, it could be an employer, it could be a family member, or they might have applied for your parents when you were a single minor child of those parents. Then you can use something called 245I. That, by the way, the petition had to be filed on or before April 30th, 2001.
Okay.
So it's something,
It's
even though it's 17 years ago, I would say every few weeks we still have another client who qualifies under that. So we have to look into...
So it's important just to know these facts.
Yeah, to look into your past record or talk to your parents and make sure, well, did Aunt Sonia apply for you back in 2000? Oh, really? Okay.
Because that can make all the difference.
Exactly. And sometimes we order your file if you don't know, just to see if there's a petition for you or your parents. But for people like that, you pay a fine if you're not in legal status anymore, but you can still get your green card without going home, which is great.
Okay.
And then 245K came more recently, in the last 10 years, I would say, and it only applies to people who are getting their green card through employment. And it says you could have been out of status in the past and still adjust your status without leaving the U.S., we will only look at your last entry to the U.S., and as long as you haven't been out of status since that time for more than 180 days, you don't even have to pay a fine. You can just apply for adjustment of status.
Okay. So if anybody wants to get more information about those two different areas of law, please look back. I think it was, we can maybe post it into the Facebook page, but I think it was 2 sessions ago that we spoke about that in a lot more detail. For today's topic, we just wanted to touch on it because it is important if that is something that is applicable for your particular case. But I don't want to, I think it's best not for us to go too much detail.
You can also go on our website, Shusterman.com, and in our internal search engine, just put 245I, 245K, and you'll see articles, you'll see videos about it. Okay.
I'm just looking at Michael Honey's post, who says he's watching Good Morning 2 a.m. in the UAE.
Wow.
I don't know whether to say good evening or good morning, but thank you for watching us and such dedicated attention to detail. So there are a few different, what we call like scenarios of how you might adjust your status. So if you are, so these are the kind of the main areas. If you are a Canadian citizen and you are here in the US on a TN visa, that's kind of one type of situation or scenario where you might adjust.
And you
your
might be
status.
Canadian or Mexican, by the way.
Oh yeah, sorry, yes, yeah. So sorry, forgive me anybody who is Mexican on this call. It's just that we usually refer to the Canadians because we just have a much higher volume of Canadian nurses rather than Mexicans. So thank you for pointing that out. Another kind of scenario is if you are maybe here on a student visa. So if you are on an F1 visa, maybe even on your OPT, and we can talk a little bit about that kind of scenario. A third type of scenario is maybe if you are on a TPS,
Right.
right? Maybe you could be on an H1,
Right.
or maybe you could be the spouse of, if you like on an H2 visa or an L2 visa.
Yeah, it's H4.
I mean, sorry, an H4, sorry.
No problem.
Friday afternoon, Carl. This is my second Facebook Live session for the day, so forgive me, everybody. So I think those are kind of the main areas.
And you could be on, there's some other spousal visas. You must have a work permit, but you could be on an E2 also.
Okay.
Yeah.
So those are the main areas. So I think let's maybe start with the student area. Okay. So if you are a student, an international student, and we speak to many of these candidates every day. In fact, I was speaking to one this morning who was from Japan. Who is studying in Kansas and is working here. She did her associates in Japan.
Okay.
And then she did her bachelor's here in the US. And she's now on her OPT status. So how would it work if she was going to be adjusting her status?
Okay, so OPT is part of your student status. When you graduate, get a degree from a school in the US, you apply for OPT, which stands for Optional Practical Training. You get a little plastic work card that's good for nurses. It'll be good for 1 year. And what's really important is you should have your employer apply for you as soon as possible because some countries, mainly Philippines, China, and India, they have huge waits. In fact, China and India, the waits are so long, you're not going to be able to adjust status under the OPT. As we're talking, it's the middle of August 2018, and Philippines is still pretty good right now, but there is going to be some retrogression. The numbers are going to go backwards in September, and I just got the report from Charlie Oppenheim from the State Department. Even though they're going to move forward in October, it was not as far forward as they move backwards, so there will be a little wait for Filipinos. Yeah.
So they're still it's not going to be as far forward as it was before this last visa bulletin.
Right,
oh,
exactly, wow. Yeah.
Oh,
but
wow.
but you know.
And will that be for the other, like for China and India as well, or you don't know yet?
No, we do.
Oh,
I actually, if you go onto it's way too complicated. We'll use up the whole half hour if I start talking about it. But if you go to our website and look up the September 2018 visa bulletin, I have already put Charlie's comments on his prediction. He's the fellow in the State Department that puts out these visa bulletins every month. He's been doing it for over 20 years, and it's all the waiting times, what category you're in for employment or family, and then what country you're from.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, Carl, say you are my Japanese nurse who is here on an OPT and is going to do an adjustment of status, how long would you think it... I mean, obviously we always know there's always an estimate. It's never exact, but how long do you think it would take?
Actually, if you're not from one of those three countries, Philippines, China, or India, most of the other countries come October will probably be current, which means no waiting times at all. So a nurse from Japan would be in great shape if the numbers are current in October, which they probably will be. Then her employer can file a petition for her. We call that an I-140 petition. Yes. She can file a packet, the I-485, that's the adjustment of status. And I don't want to bog you down with too many form names, but there's also a form for the work card. There's a form for the international work permit. There's a lot of different forms. And what you have to keep in mind is for the work card and the travel card. After you file the paperwork, it'll take about 6 months to get that.
Okay.
So if you're working for a hospital or any kind of healthcare provider, you want to be sure that it's early in your OPT, because that's 1 year.
Yeah.
If you wait until, you know, month number 6 to have your employer sponsor you, then, you know, you'll file it. Maybe you'll get it exactly in 6 months, but maybe you'll get it in 7 months. You know, immigration. So you may be out of work for a while. So file it as early as possible.
So let me ask you that. So what happens in that scenario? So I mean, ideal situation is to get a petitioner as soon as you've got your OPT, and hopefully the timelines will then work well.
Right.
But if you get it, you only get your petitioner sponsor you when you're halfway through your OPT, and the timelines don't match. How does that work from a timing perspective?
Okay. So I'll give you the good news and the bad news. Okay.
I don't know which to ask for first.
I'm going to give you the good news first.
Okay.
So the good news is, as long as you have applied for adjustment of status, even 1 day before your OPT runs out, you don't have to leave the U.S. Okay. So that's the good news.
So that's important. So let's just repeat that again for everybody to hear.
Yeah. So you're going to have a year of OPT, and remember that when you file if you're not from one of the 3 countries with backlogs, when you file your application for a green card, it's probably going to take you around a year to get your interview. So you know, even if you file it on day 1 of the OPT, your interview may be after the OPT runs out. Okay. But you are allowed to stay in the U.S. while your adjustment of status is pending.
In process.
Yes.
Okay.
The bad news, though, is that if you file too late, and remember I said it takes about 6 months to get the work and travel card. So if you wait until the 7th month of your OPT and then you file it, chances are that your OPT will run out and you won't have the work card yet. So what happens then? Well, you go to the beach.
Okay. But you stay in the country, but you can't work. Is that what it means?
You can stay in the country. You cannot work. Okay. So you'll just have, you know, the employer, you must tell your employer that, because, you know, they're not going to be happy. They're going to say, oh, you're on this shift on Monday, this shift on Tuesday, and you'll go, oh, you know what, my OPT is running out. And they'll say, well, can't you do anything to speed up the work card? And of course, you can't. No. Yeah.
We at the mercy of the governing processes that are going to dictate the timeline.
So just be smart and do things early.
And just a reminder, am I right in saying that when you're doing the adjustment of status green card, you still, the employer still has to do the prevailing wage.
Oh, yes.
And they still have to do the posting. And that whole process that we spoke about, I think it was in the first or second session that we did. So from a timing perspective, there's a lot of steps that need to take place. And that's where the timing can be tricky.
Right. And it's good that you brought that up. I mean, the posting is 10 days, so it's not a big factor. But
there's a 30-day wait after that.
Right. Yeah. But the prevailing wage is taking 3 months to get that.
Yeah.
So, you know, even if you get your employer to sponsor you after month 3 of your OPT, and then your lawyer or your employer, usually, or I would advise you to have a lawyer, but is getting the prevailing wage, by the time they get that, it might be month 6 is over. And then they apply for everything. But remember, it takes another 6 months to get your work card. So you really should apply during your first 3 months of OPT. Yeah.
Okay. And the other part that's also tricky about that, just to throw another thing to think about, is that with a lot of nurses, when you are going to be working on the OPT, you might have to do an adjustment, not an adjustment, you might have to do an endorsement to a specific state. So for instance, if you were originally wrote your NCLEX through one state and then you got to write, you're going to be working in another state, you've still got to have the timing to allow for that state license to come through as well. So there's a lot of moving parts and a lot of factors to think about and to try and be as prepared as possible.
Yeah, that's why I really love doing nurse cases, because I mean we've done over 10,000 of them. So our nurse team, our paralegals and so on, they've done so many that they have this
They
all
know.
in their head,
Yeah.
and you have to think about it because you're only going to do this one time in your life. And so if you make a mistake because you've just never traveled on that road before, you could be out of work for a long time, or maybe not even get it filed in time to stay in the U.S. And then you have to go back to your country.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so if we're still talking about the students and you were born in India, Philippines, or China, how does that work?
Well, then that's a big problem, because the waiting times are like over a year. So if you're on OPT, you will not be able to adjust status. But of course, with everything in immigration law, there's always some exceptions. So let me bring up one possible exception.
All right.
So you're a nurse, let's say you're from the Philippines or India, and then you have a boyfriend, and he happens to be a foreign student. You met him at the university, and he's from not one of those countries. He's from some other country, and he's also legally a student in the United States.
All right.
Or maybe even on a working visa in the United States. You can use your spouse's country of birth. That's called
So, like
cross.
you basically attached to, like, so say he's like rest of the world, so he's was born in a country other than India, Philippines, and China, right?
Right.
Then you can attach to that nationality if you get married.
If you get married and you both file the applications at the same time.
Okay,
Yeah.
got it.
So if he's already filing through his mother or something, he's got to agree that he will file the application through the job with you, which he probably will because
Yeah.
it's faster than
Yes.
waiting for his mother's petition.
Okay.
Okay.
It gets very complicated.
Yes, it does.
And that's where, as I've said before, it's really important that you are working with an immigration lawyer that specializes in nursing and that specializes, you know, in the immigration of healthcare workers, because there are so many nuances and so many, you know, pieces of this puzzle, that it's really important to have somebody who's truly an expert in the area.
Right.
So let's go back to the students who are, if say we have a student who was born in India. Okay, so we've had many of these nurses where they're born in India and they had no previous petition, and they're here on a student visa, and maybe they're starting their OPT, so they can work for the year of that OPT. Is there any hope in terms of a green card, adjustment of status green card?
Certainly not for adjusting status, because India's backed up over a decade for the EB3 category. So what I tell a lot of Indian nurses, and I always cite this young lady who you'll see on my website, she's wearing her blue uniform. She's born in the U.S., though, but from Indian parents, and she's my daughter-in-law, and she's the mother of my grandkids. And she is a certified registered nurse anesthetist, okay?
Right.
So to get that, you will need an advanced degree. So you can work as a nurse, like an ICU nurse, for a year on your OPT, but instead of applying for a green card, you should go back to school and get an advanced degree. And if you're a CRNA or a nurse practitioner, or maybe even in some cases a nurse manager, we may be able to get you an H-1B. So when you get your advanced degree, you will get another year of OPT. And then, well, I need to talk about H-1Bs a little. And again, it's a complicated...
That was my next point.
Oh, okay.
We're on the same page.
Yeah, but it's a
Yeah.
complicated
Yes.
subject, because most H-1Bs, I shouldn't say most, but the ones that everybody talks about are subject to a numerical cap. There's 85,000 a year, and employers file about 200,000 petitions.
So
and
it
you have
goes
to do...
lottery, right?
Yeah, it goes to a lottery. The petitions must be filed in... the petitions have to be filed in the first week of April every year. And unless the person is on OPT, they can only start... If their H-1B gets picked in the lottery, if it gets approved, they start on October the 1st. So there's 6 months where, they better be in some kind of legal status, or else they better leave the country and come back on right before October 1st. But what a lot of people don't think about, and if you go to our H-1B page and look, I have a video talking about it, there are 5 types of employers in the U.S. who can sponsor you all during the year. And that makes it, as long as you have a good petition, you don't have to go through a lottery. There's an indefinite number of H-1Bs.
Yes.
So real quickly, it's if you work at a university, and by the way, you don't have to be working for the university. Say you're working for a doctor who has his office here in Los Angeles. We have USC, UCLA, and a lot of doctors' offices are on the campus, but they're private doctors. So you work for one of those doctors.
Would that qualify?
Yes, that would qualify because you're working on the location of the university. I said there's 5. So number 2 and 3 are nonprofit institutions that are related to or affiliated with the university.
All right.
Too complicated to discuss that, except to say you ask the employer, have you ever got a cap exempt H-1B? If they say yes, you're okay. If they say no, you probably want to go and ask somebody else, because it's very complicated. And then number 4 and 5 are nonprofit and governmental research institution. So to give you an example, we represent a local one called City of Hope, which is a cancer research hospital. And so anytime we get a scientist or a nurse or a doctor, they can get an H-1B and they don't have to go through the lottery.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there are some exceptions, but it's pretty specific. And I know from our side, we have some hospitals that are like teaching hospitals. So they're affiliated with the university, and then, I've seen they would qualify for that kind of H-1.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in that case, just to go back to the adjustment of status, if there was a nurse, so for instance, who was on an OPT or maybe on an H1, if they were a nurse practitioner or a nurse manager or something like that, they can do the adjustment of status. But if they were born in India, then how does it work with the H1? Because it's 3 years, then they've got to renew for 3 years, and then what happens if the EB3 is not caught up to that?
Okay, well, there's a little bit of good news for the Indians and Chinese.
Any good news, we'll take it, right?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, if the Congress would kind of get their act together on immigration, one thing that most people are agreed on is there are per country quotas. That when you're looking for talent, I mean, maybe when you're talking about brothers and sisters, you want to be sure that all the immigrants aren't coming from 3 different countries. But when you're talking about something that this country vitally needs, which is healthcare services, you don't want to say, oh, well, you're from one of these 3 countries, so you'll have to wait years to get a green card. But if you're from Luxembourg in Europe, where no nurses are coming, I'm sorry if there's anybody on, but I've never had a nurse from Luxembourg in 40 years, then you can come right in. I mean, that doesn't make a lot of sense. So the Republicans and the Democrats are both in agreement that there should be no per country caps for employment-based immigration. But since they cannot get together to decide what is a comprehensive immigration reform bill, this particular thing doesn't get ended. So there are still not more than 7% of EB3, EB2, EB1, any of the employment categories or the family categories can come from people in one country. And since nurses tend to be so much from the Philippines, and IT workers and scientists and so on tend to be from India and China, and they're the biggest population countries in the world, those are the countries with the biggest backlogs, and that's where a nurse needs better, legal help. But okay, so having said all the bad stuff, let me say that's an excellent strategy for a nurse from one of those 3 countries, Philippines, China, or India. if you get an advanced education and you become a nurse manager in some cases, but certainly a nurse practitioner or a CRNA, anything that requires absolutely a degree, or you couldn't get the job, a 4-year degree. And don't get confused. I know most of the foreign nurses have the 4-year degree, yes, but the U.S. employers are hiring American nurses who have 2-year degrees, mm-hmm, so they can't say the minimum requirements for the job are a 4-year degree. Mm-hmm. But if you become a nurse practitioner or CRNA or a manager, they may be able to say, yeah, well, you can't do that job without a 4-year, maybe a master's or maybe even a doctorate degree. So let's say you do that, you get your H-1B, and you get it for 3 years at a time. It's normally good for 6 years, and you have to leave the country. But frankly, at least for India, the wait for a green card under the EB3 category, and mm-hmm, even the EB2 category for, yes, people with advanced degrees is over 6 years. Mm-hmm. So what do you do if you're from India and your boyfriend or your husband's from India, so you, mm-hmm, can't switch countries? Mm-hmm. Well, there is a part of the law that says if you've already got an approved I-140, that's the petition from the employer, and you're waiting for that to come up to be able to apply for a green card, you can keep extending your H-1B 3 years at a time until you get that green card. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what you should do. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's given us a lot of good information on the different scenarios. I think that, we've spoken about the students, the OPTs, we've spoken about the spousal visas, we've spoken about the H1 to a large extent. And time flies because we are almost out of time again. Time flies when you're having fun. So I think next week we're going to talk more about the TN visas. I saw that we did have some questions from some of the nurses who are on a TN visa and are going to be doing an adjustment of status green card, or maybe even had a previous priority date. So
I will try, as soon as we get off, I will try to answer some of those questions. Okay. So if you haven't posted it, go ahead and post your questions. And
please feel free to post your questions, because these are the topics that many of you have shared with us that you are interested in getting answers on. But we really welcome you to share your questions. Don't be shy. I've had some of the nurses tell me, I have so many questions, but I feel shy to explain or to ask. Carl's very nice, he won't bite. So you really can go ahead and ask him any questions that you might have. But what we'll do next week is we'll talk more about the TPS specifically and about the TN2 for adjustment of status green card. So thank you to everybody. We are officially out of time, but thank you to everybody for joining in. It's wonderful to see some familiar names in the news feed. Continue to send us questions. We really want to help you make sure that you get your answers, your questions answered. We know that this is a confusing time. It's a confusing topic. It's very stressful. It can be overwhelming. And really, what we're trying to do is just make sure to disseminate the information that you can feel at ease and feel peaceful, and this can be as smooth a transition as possible for you. Please post your questions. Check out the Kinetics Facebook page. We will be posting a lot more jobs. We have a lot more positions that are coming up, so look out for those. A number of employers all over the US, and then you will be able to understand the immigration process much better after watching these Facebook Live sessions. I know Carl has a lot of information for you to share.
And we will see you next week.
All right. Well, thank you so much, everybody, and have a great weekend. Bye-bye.